Hey there, welcome back. So you want the inside scoop on what it's like to be a Cuban student these days, especially those looking to study in Spain. You've got excerpts from Estudiar and el Extranjero.txt. It's like a guide for Cuban students wanting to study abroad, along with some news and interviews. It paints a fascinating picture of this whole experience, so let's unpack it.
Yeah, it's a really interesting mix of sources because we can see both the official narrative of Cuban education and what young Cubans are actually saying and doing.
Right. The school year just kicked off in Cuba, and it sounds like a pretty big celebration. Over 59,000 new students started, bringing the total to over 221,000.
And it's interesting, they chose the Technological University of Havana for the main opening ceremony. That focus on technology,
Yeah.
it could be a sign of where the Cuban government sees the future of its workforce.
The university rector, Marta Duña Delgado de Pena, even talked about how the government is committed to giving everyone a good education, even with the economic challenges Cuba is facing. She even tied it back to Fidel Castro's original vision for the university.
Yeah, it's a powerful message. But then we hear from young Cubans in a Cubanet interview. And a lot of them are talking about leaving Cuba after they graduate. Like one person said, get out of the country as soon as possible. It's a pretty stark contrast, wouldn't you say?
Totally. Makes you wonder if young Cubans are buying into that message of opportunity within Cuba. There's this feeling from the interviews that many just don't see a future for themselves there. They say things like, "In Cuba, there are no goals. The game is rigged." It's a bit heartbreaking, actually.
And this exodus of young people is something that even President Miguel Díaz-Canel is worried about. He's openly talked about how it pains him that young Cubans don't see a future in Cuba, even blaming the U.S. for creating a migratory crisis.
Okay, so he's acknowledging that there's a problem, but what's he going to do about it?
Well, he's calling for a program that specifically focuses on what young people need. He even said that if they don't pay attention to the youth, it could break the continuity of the revolution. Strong words. It shows how seriously he's taking this.
Wow. So we've got this tension between a government saying, hey, there's opportunity here, and young people saying, nope, we're out. And that leads us right into the guide, Estudiar en el Extranjero.txt, which is all about helping Cuban students study in Spain.
And even the fact that this guide exists speaks volumes. It shows that studying abroad is a real option that many Cuban students are considering.
For sure. So let's dive into this guide and see what it reveals about the process. It starts by talking about the different types of degrees you can get in Spain, like official degrees versus university-specific ones.
Think of it this way. Official degrees are like a golden ticket. They're recognized by the Spanish government, so you can use them to keep studying or get a job in the public sector.
Right, those are the ones you want if you're aiming high. Then the guide gets into this concept of habilitantes and no habitantes, which basically means whether or not your profession needs special approval to be practiced in Spain.
Imagine you're a doctor in Cuba. Your medical degree is great, but to practice in Spain, you'll need extra steps to show your skills match up with Spanish standards. Those are your habilitantes professions. But if you're a graphic designer, for example, you probably won't need that extra layer of approval because your skills are more transferable. That's no habilitantes.
Makes sense. It's all about how specialized your profession is. And the guide even points you to another resource if you need to figure out the specifics for your field. They're really trying to cover all the bases here.
It really is like a roadmap for Cuban students. It's acknowledging the challenges and giving them the tools to navigate this complex process.
So once you've got a handle on the types of degrees and figured out if your profession needs extra steps, the next big thing is finding a program that fits you.
And they recommend starting with the basics. Google and the Ministry of Universities website. It seems obvious, but you'd be surprised how many people overlook those simple starting points.
But they also stress that it's crucial to dig deeper and check out each university's website. That's where you'll find all the nitty-gritty details, like specific admission requirements and, most importantly, tuition costs.
And don't forget about living expenses. Spain might be more affordable than some other European countries, but those daily costs can sneak up on you if you're not careful.
Totally. Speaking of affordability, the guide mentions that public universities in Andalusia tend to have cheaper master's programs. So if you're on a tight budget, that's definitely something to consider.
It's a smart move to highlight those regional differences. It shows they're really thinking about the financial realities that Cuban students are facing.
Okay, so you've found a program you're interested in, you've checked the costs, and you're ready to apply. But for many Cuban students, the biggest hurdle is
Money, right?
Right.
Let's be real. Studying abroad is expensive, especially for students coming from a country like Cuba.
Exactly, and the guide acknowledges this head on. It even lists a bunch of scholarships that are specifically geared toward Cuban students, like the Foundation Carolina, M8VEC, AUIP, and a whole bunch of others.
These scholarships can be lifesavers for students who wouldn't otherwise be able to afford this opportunity. But they also highlight that there are scholarships offered by individual universities, too.
Yeah, those are often hidden gems. It's worth spending some time digging around on those university websites. You never know what you might find.
Absolutely. It's all about being resourceful and persistent. And once you've got the money situation sorted out, then comes the fun part, all the paperwork.
Okay, fun might be a stretch, but let's dive into the pre-enrollment, admission, and legalization process.
The guide makes it clear that while you might not need a ton of official documents for the initial pre-enrollment phase, they're essential later on, especially when you're applying for your visa.
So don't get too comfortable just yet. You'll still need to gather all those documents eventually. And they even give you a step-by-step breakdown of how to legalize those academic documents in Cuba, starting with either the Ministry of Higher Education or the Ministry of Public Health.
Think of these ministries as gatekeepers. They're responsible for verifying and authorizing your academic credentials, basically confirming that your diplomas and transcripts are legit.
And then after those ministries, you have to go through the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, or MINEX.
This is where things can get a bit tricky. Just in terms of the process, you can't just walk into MINEX and hand over your documents. You need to go through authorized institutions like Consultoria Jurídica International, CONABI, or some of the others they listed.
Right. It's all about making sure everything is officially stamped and verified before you send it off to the Spanish consulate in Havana for the final approval. It's a process for sure, but at least the guide lays it all out in a way that's easy to follow.
It's like they're anticipating the questions and anxieties that Cuban students might have and providing clear, step-by-step guidance.
And speaking of anxieties, one of the big ones for students is getting their medical and criminal record certificate.
Right. Those are pretty standard requirements for any visa application. But the guide goes into a lot of detail about the specific steps involved in getting those documents in Cuba.
Yeah, like for the medical certificate, you need to start with your family doctor or a general practitioner. Then you need the polyclinic director to endorse it. And then you take it to the provincial health directorate. And guess what? You're not done yet.
Nope. Then you've got to go through that whole MINX legalization process again, using those same authorized institutions.
They even break down the cost. 375 Cuban pesos for legalization, plus another 20 in stamps.
It's important to highlight those costs because it shows how this process adds up financially. It's not just about the big expenses like tuition and flights. It's also about these smaller fees that can really add up.
And then there's the criminal record certificate, which involves a similar process of going through authorized institutions and then men on erects for legalization.
And this one is even more expensive. The certificate itself costs 250 pesos, plus 375 for legalization. And then, of course, you've got those pesky stamp fees on top of that.
It all adds up to over 1,600 pesos, which is a significant chunk of change for many Cubans.
Absolutely. And it's another reminder of the financial hurdles that Cuban students have to overcome to make this happen. But here's a pro tip from the guide. Get both the medical and criminal record certificates done together.
Smart. Kill two birds with one stone. And since both certificates are only valid for 6 months, timing is everything.
It's like a puzzle where you're trying to fit all the pieces together within a limited time frame.
But even with all that paperwork out of the way, the real nail-biter is still ahead, the visa application.
And the guide is very honest about this. They say it's the most stressful part of the whole process and that you should expect it to take anywhere from a month to 45 days.
That waiting game must be excruciating. You've done all this work, you've gathered all the documents, spent all this money, and now you're just sitting there, fingers crossed, hoping for the best.
It's like the culmination of all your efforts. And the fact that the guide mentions a separate article dedicated entirely to the visa application process, it shows just how complex and important this step is.
It's like a whole other deep dive within a deep dive.
Yeah.
But let's say you get that visa, you're officially on your way to Spain. What happens when you arrive?
Well, even arriving in Spain doesn't mean the paperwork is over. You've still got some important steps to take care of. First up is the empadronamiento, which is basically registering yourself with the local municipality where you'll be living.
So it's like checking in with the authorities and saying, hey, I'm here and this is where you can find me.
Exactly. It's a crucial step for establishing your legal residency in Spain. And the guide lists the documents you'll need. A registration form, your rental contract,
Yeah.
and your passport.
Straightforward enough. And once you've registered with the municipality, the next step is getting your TIE, the foreigner identification card.
This is the card that officially proves you have the right to live and study in Spain. And thankfully, you can book your TIE appointment online, which can save you a lot of time and hassle.
The guide even mentions that you can see all the documents you'll need for your TIE appointment during the online booking process. That's super helpful. It's like they're trying to make this process as smooth as possible, even though it's still pretty complicated.
It's like they're holding your hand through the process.
Yeah.
Which is exactly what Cuban students need in this situation. They're navigating a whole new system, a whole new country, and having those clear instructions can make a world of difference.
So you've booked your appointment, you've gathered your documents, and you're ready to go. What happens at the TIE appointment itself?
We'll head to either the foreigner's office or the police station, depending where you're living in Spain. And the main thing they'll do is take your fingerprints. It's all part of the official identification process.
Fingerprints, huh? It feels very official, like you're in a spy movie or something.
It is official. It's all about making sure they have your accurate information and that you are who you say you are. And once you've given your fingerprints, you'll have to wait yet again.
Oh no, not more waiting. How long this time?
Tough 45 days. But here's the good news. Once you get that TIE, you're officially a resident of Spain. You've made it through the bureaucratic maze. You can study, work, travel, and start building your new life.
It's like reaching the finish line after a marathon. It's a long and challenging process. But for many Cuban students, the rewards are worth the effort.
Absolutely. It's about pursuing opportunities that might not be available in Cuba, expanding their horizons, and creating a brighter future for themselves. And the fact that they're willing to go through all this just shows their incredible determination and resilience.
It's inspiring, isn't it, to think about all the challenges they overcome to make this happen. But I'm also curious about the bigger picture. What does this exodus of young Cubans mean for the future of Cuba itself?
That's a really important question. And it's something we'll explore in more detail in this final part of our deep dive. We'll look at the potential impact of this brain drain on Cuba, the government's response, and what it all means for the future of this complex and fascinating country.
You know, it's really striking to see how many young Cubans are choosing to leave their home country, to pursue their education, and build a future elsewhere. It makes you wonder what this means for Cuba in the long run.
It's a question that's been on the minds of many, including President Diaz-Canel himself. Remember how he talked about the pain he feels seeing young people leave and how it could threaten the continuity of the revolution? That's a pretty significant statement.
It definitely shows how seriously the government is taking this issue. But it also highlights a kind of contradiction, doesn't it? They're promoting education and opportunity within Cuba, yet so many young people feel like they have to leave to achieve their goals.
It's a complex situation with deep roots. On one hand, Cuba has a strong history of investing in education and literacy, and there's a genuine desire to provide opportunities for its citizens. But on the other hand, there are economic limitations, political realities, and a sense among some young people that their aspirations just aren't being met within the current system.
And this guide, Estudiar en el Extranjero.txt, almost embodies that tension. It's like it's saying, we want you to succeed, and if that means going abroad, here's how to do it.
Yeah.
It's practical. But it also implicitly acknowledges that studying in Spain is a viable, even desirable option for many Cuban students.
Exactly. And the fact that this guide exists at all
Yeah.
and is so detailed and comprehensive suggests that studying abroad is not just a fringe phenomenon, but a significant trend.
It makes you think about the potential long-term impact on Cuba. If a significant portion of its young, educated population is leaving, what happens to the workforce? What happens to innovation and entrepreneurship? What happens to the future of the country itself?
These are questions that Cuban policymakers are grappling with right now. Some argue that this brain drain could have a devastating effect on Cuba's long-term development. They fear a loss of skilled labor, a decline in innovation, and a widening gap between those who can leave and those who stay behind.
It's like a slow bleed of talent and potential, and it's hard to imagine that not having some consequences down the line.
But there are also those who see this exodus as a potential opportunity. They argue that Cuban students who study abroad gain valuable skills and experiences that they can bring back to Cuba, contributing to its development in new and innovative ways.
It's like a boomerang effect. They leave, they learn, they grow, and then they return with a fresh perspective and a new set of tools to help build a better future for their home country.
It's a hopeful perspective, and there are certainly examples of Cuban professionals who have done just that, returned home after studying or working abroad, and made significant contributions to their fields.
It's a reminder that this story is still unfolding. It's too early to say definitively what the long-term impact of this trend will be. But one thing is clear. The choices that young Cubans are making today will have a profound impact on the future of their country.
And it's a reminder that the relationship between education, opportunity, and national identity is a complex and ever-evolving one. What's considered a brain drain by some might be seen as a brain gain by others, and the lines between leaving and returning, contributing from afar or contributing on the ground, are increasingly blurred.
So after this deep dive, what stands out to you? Is it the determination of these students? The bureaucratic hurdles they overcome? Or the larger questions about Cuba's future? Whatever it is. We hope this has given you a more nuanced understanding of what it means to be a Cuban student in today's world. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep learning.